Imagine a very ancient story, as enigmatic as it is controversial, where the first woman is not Eve, but a figure who defied the Creator himself. Lilith, a name that evokes mystery, seduction, and, above all, rebellion. In a time when the rules were written by divine hands, she refused to follow the script. Why did this woman, who was supposed to be Adam's companion, choose the path of insubordination? And more importantly, what does this tell us about human nature, power, and the role of women in history? Lilith is not just a mythological figure. She is the personification of the spirit of insubordination that defies norms, whether in ancient tales or in contemporary struggles. While many see her as the first villain, others consider her the first feminist icon. How can a figure be so polarizing? The answer lies in the layers of her story, which intertwine with the deepest questions of identity, power, and autonomy. Lilith's journey begins with her creation as Adam, but quickly takes a detour when she refuses to submit. This simple refusal transformed Lilith from a companion into a symbol of resistance, and her story has been distorted, hidden, and reinterpreted over the centuries. But what if we looked beyond the label of demon and saw Lilith for what she truly represents? A woman who was unafraid to challenge power, even if it meant her downfall. Today, as we revisit Lilith's story, we are invited to question the narratives we have been told. Who was Lilith really? And what can her story teach us about the power of a single choice? The choice not to bow down, not to accept what was imposed, to claim one's own place in the world. So stay with us and discover the true legacy of Lilith, the first woman, the true woman who did not bow down to a god. Lilith, a figure shrouded in mystery and controversy, emerges from the shadows of mythology as a multifaceted enigma. She is often described as a demoness, an irresistible seductress, Adam's first wife, and a creature of the night. Each of these descriptions carries with it a deep symbolic charge, reflecting the complexity of human nature and cultural interpretations over time. Imagine Lilith as that character from an urban legend who haunts not only nightmares but also social and religious conventions. As an entity as old as ancient civilizations, she defied established norms, creating an image that resonates to this day in many cultures. On dark nights, when the full moon illuminates the sky, it is easy to imagine Lilith walking among the trees, her trail shrouded in mystery. For many, she is the personification of rebellion, of the refusal to submit to the rules that have been imposed on her. This idea of insubordination is echoed in various mythologies, such as Greek mythology, where figures like Pandora also challenge the status quo. Lilith, however, is not just a mythological character. She represents an archetype that spans eras and civilizations, resonating in the stories of gods, heroes, and popular beliefs that shape our worldview. The figure of Lilith has evolved over time, adapting to the different cultures and religions that have adopted or demonized her. In Egyptian mythology, for example, we find deities and beings that, like Lilith, symbolize chaos and the untamed power of nature. In Celtic mythology, mystical beings that inhabit forests and lakes carry the same aura of mystery and moral ambiguity. Lilith, with her fluid and multifaceted character, mirrors these traditions, sometimes seen as a threat, sometimes as a force to be reckoned with. She is also a figure who unmasks the duality of human beings, the constant conflict between good and evil, the known and the unknown. Lilith embodies this conflict, not as a one-dimensional villain, but as a figure who defies simplistic definitions. In legends and fairy tales, we find echoes of Lilith in female characters who defy the norm, such as the witch in Snow White or Morgana Le Fay in Arthurian legend. These are figures who, like Lilith, walk the fine line between heroism and villainy. Throughout the ages, Lilith has maintained her status as a polarizing figure, challenging convention and raising questions about the nature of power, autonomy, and rebellion. Her story is often a reflection of the cultural tensions of her time. As Roman mythology adapted gods and myths from other cultures, Lilith has also been transformed by each new era that has claimed her, becoming a mirror of the concerns and beliefs of these ancient civilizations. Lilith's journey begs the question: who really holds the power to define morality and the role of female figures in mythology and history? Lilith's roots run deep and ancient, embedded in the rich tapestry of Mesopotamian cultures. At that time, she was not just a mythological figure, but a feared presence, a shadow of the night known as Lilith. In texts and inscriptions from the time, Lilith appeared as a nocturnal spirit, an entity associated with the destructive forces and hidden dangers of the night. Imagine the people of that time, feeling a shiver run down their spines at the mention of her name, fearing the approach of this mysterious being. She was seen as a lurking predator, especially dangerous to women and children, which shows us how ancient civilizations personified their fears in mythological figures. In Mesopotamia, a region that gave rise to many of the first great civilizations, the concept of Lilith was closely linked to beliefs about evil and chaos. She was not simply a myth, but a real threat, someone who could invade the domestic space, bringing disease and despair. As a kind of cultural bogeyman, she was feared by those who believed in her ability to prey on the most vulnerable. These fears were so deep that amulets and charms were used to ward off her power. It is interesting to note how these practices reflect the beliefs of the time, when myths, urban legends, and cryptids were intertwined with people's daily lives. Ancient texts speak of Lilith as a spirit of the night, a presence that manifested itself in the darkest hours, when the line between the world of the living and the dead became blurred. She was seen as a creature that fed on human frailties, especially those that arise in the dead of night. Her association with disease and child abductions highlights the way in which Mesopotamian cultures viewed the night, not as a time of rest, but as a period of danger and uncertainty. These associations are not unique to Mesopotamia. In cultures such as the Greeks and Romans, we find figures who, like Lilith, were both feared and revered for their power to influence people's lives in terrifying ways. The legend of Lilith has evolved over the centuries, but her Mesopotamian origins remain a testament to the power that these early civilizations attributed to the spiritual world. Lilith was not just a mythological figure, but a reflection of the anxieties and fears that permeated these societies. Stories of her folkloric figures found in diverse cultures, such as the Baba Yaga of Slavic mythology or the vampires of European tradition, who were also shaped by the collective fears of their times. Today, as we look back, we see how Lilith, the Mesopotamian Lilith, is a character who transcends time. She continues to fascinate and terrify, a reminder of the unseen forces that our ancestors believed influenced their lives. This deep connection with the past makes us reflect on how ancient civilizations projected their fears and how these myths have survived and evolved over the centuries, still finding echoes in the legends and fairy tales that we tell today. And so Lilith moves through the ages, carrying with her the marks of her Mesopotamian origins, as her story continues to unfold in the cultures that followed her. Over the centuries, Lilith has been represented in many ways in ancient art and mythologies, each reinforcing her untamable and wild nature. Imagine a winged figure with clawed feet, designed to symbolize a force that refuses to be tamed. These images are not mere illustrations. They carry with them the weight of symbolism, showing Lilith as a being who defies both gods and men. In the myth of Gilgamesh and the Halupu tree, Lilith appears as an adversary, occupying a space between the divine and the earthly, an entity that does not submit to the rules imposed by either party. This symbolism resonates in many mythologies, where similar figures emerge to challenge established orders, reminding us that chaos and rebellion are part of human nature and the universe. Art, as a reflection of a culture's beliefs and mythologies, has often depicted Lilith as a hybrid creature, half woman, half beast. Her wings and claws are details that cannot be ignored, as they reveal her connection to the natural world and her resistance to attempts at control. Think of ancient amulets and talismans, where figures like Lilith were carved to capture and ward off her power, while also acknowledging the strength she represented. These artistic representations are found in many civilizations, from Assyrian reliefs to medieval manuscripts, all highlighting the persistence of her image through the ages. In mythologies around the world, we find beings who, like Lilith, defy norms and present themselves as antagonists of divine forces. In Norse mythology, for example, the Valkyries are figures who, although linked to the gods, possess an autonomy that places them in a unique position of power and influence. Likewise, Lilith, with her outstretched wings and sharp claws, personifies the idea that some forces cannot be controlled or tamed, serving as a reminder of the duality between order and chaos. These symbols, throughout history, not only illustrate her nature, but also the complexity of ancient beliefs that saw the world as a place where good and evil were in constant struggle. The myth of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest narratives, includes Lilith as a figure who occupies the Halapu tree, challenging Gilgamesh to remove it. This story is a classic example of how Lilith was portrayed as a force that occupies sacred spaces, challenging heroes and gods in equal measure. Her claws, which dig into the tree, symbolize her determination and her role as a guardian of ancient mysteries. This particular depiction is a reflection of the many other stories and legends in which Lilith or similar beings take on the role of antagonist, testing the limits of the protagonists and, by extension, the established order. These artistic and mythological representations of Lilith, with their wild and untamed elements, show us how ancient cultures dealt with forces they could not understand or control. She remains a figure that symbolizes defiance of authority, fierce independence, and the inescapable presence of chaos in the cosmic order. Lilith, with her wings and claws, continues to remind us that in every culture and time, there has always been a figure who embodied rebellion against the established forces, be it a god, a hero, or an ordinary man. Lilith's influence was not limited to the mythological realm. She permeated everyday life in Mesopotamia, a civilization where the spiritual and the physical were deeply intertwined. People at the time not only heard stories about Lilith, but also lived in fear of her presence. This fear was so real that it led to the creation of amulets, talismans, and charm bowls, all designed to ward off the threat that Lilith posed. Imagine a young mother, fearful for the well-being of her newborn, turning to these objects to protect her home. The belief that Lilith could attack children and pregnant women was so strong that these practices became an essential part of everyday life. These objects were not just decorative. They bore inscriptions and symbols intended to ward off Lilith and other evil spirits. In an age when science was still in its infancy, magic and religious beliefs offered a sense of security from unseen dangers. Charm bowls, for example, were placed upside down in the corners of homes, inscribed in Aramaic or other ancient languages, designed to capture and contain spirits like Lilith. These items were considered essential to the well-being of the family, especially during times of vulnerability such as pregnancy and childbirth, showing how legends and myths could directly influence people's practical lives. The figure of Lilith also expanded beyond Mesopotamia, finding echoes in other ancient cultures and religions. In Judaism, for example, she was portrayed as a demonic figure whose threat was similarly combated with amulets and incantations. The famous Lamia in Greek mythology, who also preyed on children, shares many traits with Lilith, showing how this figure was adapted and transformed over the ages. Protective practices, such as the use of amulets, were common not only in Mesopotamia, but also in civilizations such as Egypt and Rome, where similar beliefs shaped religious and cultural practices. These amulets and talismans also reflect the way ancient religions dealt with evil and chaos. They were not only forms of protection, but also material expressions of the ongoing struggle between good and evil. Lilith, with her reputation as a nocturnal predator, became a symbol of this struggle, a presence that needed to be controlled, not by physical force, but by the power of words and rituals. This idea that evil can be contained through sacred symbols and words is a concept that crosses several cultures, showing the universality of these practices. Over time, Lilith has evolved from a feared figure to an icon symbolizing indomitable feminine power and resistance to patriarchal norms. However, her early influence, especially in cultures such as Mesopotamia, reminds us of how religious and mythological beliefs can shape not only the stories we tell, but also the practices we adopt in our daily lives. Lilith thus remains a living example of how myth and reality can intertwine in complex and lasting ways. Over the centuries, Lilith's image has evolved, reflecting the changing societies and religions that portrayed her. Initially seen as a demonic and malevolent figure, a true embodiment of chaos, Lilith has gradually gained new layers of interpretation. In older texts, such as those from Mesopotamia, she was clearly a threat, a nocturnal spirit associated with fear and destruction. However, as her story was revisited by different cultures, especially in Judaism and Christianity, Lilith began to be seen in a different light, which contrasted with her original representation. It is interesting to note how these transformations reflect not only a change in the perception of Lilith, but also in the dynamics of power and views on the feminine. Within the biblical tradition and the Christian Apocrypha, Lilith is not explicitly mentioned in the canonical text, but her presence is felt between the lines. In some interpretations, she is described as Adam's first wife, a woman who refused to submit to him, defying the divine order. This narrative resonates with themes of freedom and rebellion, themes that, over time, allowed Lilith to be reinterpreted not only as a villain, but also as a symbol of resistance. In many versions of the story, she chooses exile rather than submission, which opens space for a broader discussion about the role of women in society and in ancient religions. Lilith's legacy has continued to evolve, being reinterpreted by writers, artists, and thinkers over the centuries. During the Middle Ages, she reappears in texts such as the Alphabet of Ben Sira, where her story is explored in greater detail. Here, Lilith is clearly a figure of power, someone who does not conform to the expectations imposed on her. Her refusal to submit to Adam and her escape to live among the demons are acts that transform her from a simple mythological figure into an icon of autonomy. This evolution is fascinating, as it shows how a figure originally seen as dangerous and evil can be reinterpreted to reflect changing cultural values and perceptions over time. In more recent times, especially with the advent of the feminist movement, Lilith has been revived as a symbol of female empowerment. What was once considered an act of disobedience has come to be seen as an act of self-affirmation. Lilith, then, has gone from being just a shadowy figure from the past to becoming an icon in the fight for equality and women's rights. Her story, which once served as a warning about the dangers of rebellion, now inspires those who seek to challenge established norms and fight for a more just world. It is remarkable how Lilith, a figure rooted in the most ancient civilizations, continues to have relevance in modern discussions of identity and power. Ultimately, Lilith remains a multifaceted figure who defies simple categorization. Her story, from Mesopotamian legends to contemporary interpretations, is a journey through human fears, values, and aspirations. Lilith is not just a myth. She is a mirror of the societies that shaped her, a figure who continues to inspire and challenge convention. As we explore more about her influence and legacy, we discover that Lilith's story is far from over, with new interpretations and meanings emerging with each generation.